Fists pounded against thick glass. The sound echoed sharply across the marble floors of the historic Charleston Hotel lobby. It was 8:15 on a Sunday morning in July. Outside, the South Carolina heat was already oppressive, creating a thick layer of condensation on the exterior of the chilled glass doors that led to the main ballroom. Inside those doors, trapped in the aggressive air conditioning, the heavy, sweet scent of thousands of cut white gardenias was already starting to turn stale. My 32-year-old sister stood on the wrong side of that glass. Ashley was wearing a custom silk wedding gown, her hands pressed flat against the locked double doors. She hit the glass again, her diamond rings clicking against the surface. The venue manager stood safely behind the reception desk with his hands folded behind his back. He explained the situation with practiced, professional detachment. The contracting organization had formally withdrawn their authorization an hour ago. There was no personal contract on file to replace it. There was no valid insurance certificate covering the event. Under hotel policy, the ballroom could not be accessed by vendors or guests. My mother, Carol, pulled out her phone. Her voice was sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. She demanded that the manager call me immediately. She expected me to fix it. That had always been my job. I am Vanessa Reed. I am 38 years old. And for the last 12 years, I have been the Chief Operating Officer of the Reed Scholars Foundation. I was the person who solved the problems, balanced the budgets, and made sure the events ran smoothly, but I was not going to fix it this time. By the time my mother demanded they call me, I was thousands of miles away. My first flight had taken me out of Charleston International Airport up to New York. Now, I was sitting in the dark cabin of a red-eye flight bound for Doha, the next leg of my journey to the Maldives. I looked down at my phone screen in the dim light of the cabin. The last text message from Ashley was sitting in my notifications. It said, "You will regret humiliating me." I slid my finger across the screen and switched the phone to airplane mode. I set the device down next to a thick blue folder resting on my tray table. I did not cry. I did not feel the urge to call her back. I only opened my secure email application to verify that my final document transfer had gone through to the Independent Audit Committee. The previous evening, the atmosphere had been very different. We were gathered in a private dining room at a riverside country club, just 20 minutes away from the hotel. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing. Crystal glasses clinked together in toasts, and waiters moved silently around the room, pouring expensive champagne. Ashley stood at the head of the table, commanding the attention of the entire room. She looked down at me and delivered her demand with a perfect smile. She said I needed to provide $25,000 by the end of the weekend. She called it my required family contribution for the wedding. I set my fork down on the white tablecloth. I asked her exactly what the money was for, and I requested to see an invoice. Ashley rolled her eyes, scanning the faces of our relatives to ensure she had an audience. She asked why I always had to act like an auditor. She reminded me that this was a celebration of love, not a corporate tax return. My mother placed a manicured hand on Ashley's arm, but her gaze was fixed firmly on me. Carol stated that my presence at the wedding was a privilege, not a right. She suggested I should be grateful they were letting me participate in the family legacy at all. Then Ashley delivered the line she had likely been practicing all week. She adjusted her posture and told me I was nothing without family money. The words hung in the quiet dining room. I looked at the woman in the elegant white dress. I thought about the hundreds of hours I had spent processing payroll to keep the foundation running while she shopped for floral arrangements. I thought about the grant reports I had completely rewritten because she had neglected to submit them. I remembered navigating the public relations disaster last year when she posted an insensitive video online. I did not list those sacrifices out loud. I simply looked at her and repeated her words. Family money. Ashley laughed. A few of our extended relatives chuckled right along with her. They had rewritten reality so completely that they actually believed I was the dependent one. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I folded my linen napkin and placed it neatly beside my untouched plate. I looked directly at my sister, keeping my voice completely level. I told her to enjoy her wedding. I walked out of the dining room without looking back. Carol sent a text message before I even reached the parking lot, assuring me that I would return before morning once I calmed down. She genuinely believed I was throwing a tantrum. She had no idea that when I opened the trunk of my car, my suitcase and passport were already inside. Before starting the engine to drive to the airport, I checked my work email on my phone. A new message had arrived from a local event vendor. It contained an invoice for a student leadership floral display. The total cost matched the exact amount recently withdrawn from a restricted scholarship account. I zoomed in on the document. The itemized list included the exact rare white gardenias and blush peonies from Ashley's wedding mood board. I took a screenshot for my internal case file. I did not forward the email to my mother. Instead, I dialed the direct number for Elaine Porter, the independent legal counsel for the Foundation Audit Committee. Elaine answered on the second ring. I told her I was looking at a vendor invoice that appeared to be intentionally miscoded. I read the descriptions to her, listening to the hum of my car engine in the humid night air. Elaine was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she asked me a very specific question. She wanted to know if the foundation was listed as the contracting party for the wedding venue. I opened the master contract file PDF on my phone. I read the very first line of the document aloud to the lawyer. Reed Scholars Foundation presents its annual Scholarship Donor Appreciation Weekend. 5 days before the rehearsal dinner, on Monday morning, I sat at the mahogany conference table in the foundation office. I held my father's heavy gold fountain pen, carefully correcting a draft of a donor appreciation letter. The metal felt cool against my fingers. My father passed away in 2014. At 26 years old, I was working at a corporate consulting firm in Chicago, making a very comfortable living. Following the creation of a memorial foundation funded by his life insurance and local business pledges, I packed up my apartment and moved back to North Carolina. Leaving a lucrative career behind, I built our operating systems from the ground up. 4 long years went into writing grant policies, establishing compliance frameworks, and setting up accounting structures. The quiet, tedious work had to be done so the scholarships would survive. Carol walked into the conference room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. My mother reached across the table and slid the drafted letter out from under my hand. She picked up the gold pen, tested the ink on a scrap of paper, and signed her own name at the bottom with a practiced flourish. The woman loved being the public face of his legacy, handing out oversized checks while I balanced the ledgers in the back room. I did not complain, and I let her keep the pen. Later that afternoon, the office felt completely suffocating. I had been awake until 3 in the morning, finalizing the quarterly grant compliance report, verifying student disbursement records, and arguing with a catering vendor over a persistent billing error. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ashley swept into the room holding a portable ring light and her phone. The heavy scent of her jasmine perfume instantly filled the small space. My sister did not ask if I was busy, nor did she acknowledge the stacks of paper covering my desk. Positioning herself in front of the foundation logo on the wall, she adjusted her hair and started recording a video about our family's deep commitment to the community. The recording ended with her dropping the phone onto my keyboard. Ashley demanded I fix the engagement metrics and rewrite the caption because her numbers looked wrong. Then, the bride-to-be walked out to get an iced coffee without saying thank you. An automated security alert chimed from my computer speaker 30 minutes later. The financial system I had built earlier that year required a second signature for any transaction over $20,000. Ashley marched back into the office, holding her plastic cup tightly, the ice rattling as she set it down on my desk. A massive deposit labeled Donor Hospitality was sitting in a pending state, and she was clearly annoyed that her purchase had been blocked. I kept my hands resting on my keyboard. I looked up at her and told her to send the attendee list and the specific donor purpose, adding that I would review the transaction once the documentation was complete. My mother appeared in the doorway before Ashley could answer. Carol smoothed the front of her designer blazer, sighing loudly enough for the administrative staff in the hall to hear. According to her, I always made things difficult because I was obsessed with control. Arguing with her was useless, and I certainly did not approve the transfer. The transaction simply remained in the pending queue. They thought my entire existence revolved around the foundation office and Sunday dinners at the family estate. When I left work that evening, I did not drive to my mother's house. I drove to a small, practical condominium across town. The deed was in my name alone. I had purchased it 3 months ago, using money saved from private consulting work I did on the weekends. Cardboard moving boxes were stacked neatly against the living room wall, smelling faintly of dust and packing tape. A printed offer letter sat on the kitchen counter, officially naming me the new chief operating officer of an independent education nonprofit down in Atlanta. I checked my bank application, confirming my personal emergency fund was fully stocked. Next, I reviewed my flight itinerary for the Maldives. The trip was supposed to be a quiet transition between my old life and my new one, booked long before any wedding drama started. It was never meant to be a chaotic escape. My phone buzzed against the granite counter. The caller ID showed my mother's name. Carol wanted me to cancel my evening appointment so I could rewrite Ashley's welcome speech for the weekend event. I poured a glass of tap water, took a slow sip, and said no. I offered to look at a draft the next morning instead. The silence on the line grew heavy. Carol lowered her voice to that soft, disappointed register she always used when she wanted to inflict maximum guilt. Her tone carried the weight of a judge passing sentence, as she claimed my father would have done it for family. I looked at a framed photograph of my dad sitting on the bookshelf. He was smiling in front of his old hardware store, wearing a faded denim shirt. For the first time in 12 years, I realized his memory was not a command. I told my mother I had a prior commitment, and I ended the call. My prior commitment was a scheduled meeting with Elaine Porter. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the courthouse. I ordered black tea, warming my hands on the ceramic mug before asking the question that had been keeping me awake for weeks. I asked her what my legal obligation was if I suspected organizational funds were being used for private benefit. The independent attorney set her cup down carefully. Elaine did not push for names or dollar amounts immediately. The seasoned lawyer simply advised me not to access any files outside my normal operational duties. Preserving only the records I handled in my daily routine was her main directive, along with instructing me to use the formal audit channel if I found concrete proof. Agreeing to schedule a follow-up meeting for the week after the wedding seemed like the safest path. Triggering a formal review that could destroy the foundation required absolute certainty. I unlocked the door to my condominium just as the sun was setting over the city. The apartment was dark, quiet, and entirely mine. I opened my laptop on the kitchen island to check the system dashboard one last time before logging off for the night. A red notification banner flashed across the top of the screen. The system indicated that the donor compliance review, originally scheduled for late next month, had been suddenly moved up. The new date was set for the Monday morning immediately following the wedding. My stomach tightened. I clicked on the restricted scholarship ledger to verify the current balances against the upcoming review. The numbers loaded onto the screen, glaring brightly in the dim room. The main account was short exactly $25,000. The following morning, the Mercer Education Trust grant agreement sat open on my desk. Printed on heavy ivory paper, the terms were absolutely clear. Funds were legally restricted to tuition, textbooks, and direct student support. Tracing a finger down the ledger on my monitor, a distinct pattern emerged. A massive spike in donor hospitality expenses perfectly mirrored the timeline of my sister planning her wedding. I highlighted the suspicious transaction codes. Downloading student data to a personal device was a violation of security protocols, so the records stayed firmly within the secure foundation server. My phone vibrated constantly against the wood veneer of my desk. Ashley had started a group text message with 12 extended family members. Her opening message claimed her older sister was refusing to help with one final wedding expense. Aunts and cousins immediately chimed in, calling me greedy and reminding me how the foundation had given me a career. Arguing with them would only generate more noise. Opening a private chat with the bride, I typed a single request. Please identify the account and purpose for the $25,000. Her reply appeared 3 minutes later. Put it back before the donor review. Then you can come. Those 2 sentences changed everything. Reaching for the office phone, I initiated a routine vendor verification call with the catering and events company. The accounting representative on the other end sounded rushed and promised to forward the complete file. 5 minutes later, an email arrived containing 2 vastly different attachments. The original document was titled Bridal Suite and Wedding Floral Installation. The revised document, bearing the exact same invoice number and total amount, was labeled Donor Hospitality Suite and Student Leadership Display. Attached to the bottom of the thread was a message from Carol Reed. My mother had specifically requested they update the billing description using Foundation-compatible language. The intention to conceal the theft was now undeniable in black and white. Lunch that afternoon took place at an upscale bistro downtown. Carol slid into the booth across from me, ordering sparkling water and playing the role of the deeply wounded matriarch. The woman insisted her youngest daughter only wanted to share her special day with her sister. Pressing her about the missing funds yielded a sharp, disappointed glare. My mother accused me of turning our loving family into a hostile corporate investigation. Stirring her water with a silver spoon, Carol presented a solution. She gently suggested transferring my personal savings into the Foundation operating account to cover the shortfall. Following the upcoming donor compliance review, she promised the organization would reimburse my generous contribution. The architecture of the trap suddenly became crystal clear. Transferring exactly $25,000 right after facing accusations of greed would create a permanent financial trail. It would look exactly like a guilty employee paying back stolen money. Refusing to sign any internal memo without a verified purpose, I paid the bill and returned to the office. Settling back into my chair, I opened the document retention archive. Searching my own name would leave an audit footprint. Filtering the files by creation date, for the past week, was much safer. A newly uploaded file caught my attention immediately. Preliminary Incident Summary regarding unauthorized transactions by Operations Director Vanessa Reed. My pulse pounded in my ears while reading the 3-page document. The report formally accused me of misclassifying Foundation expenses, preparing to resign without notice, and intending to flee the country. Opening the metadata properties panel revealed the true authors. Carol had created the initial draft 3 days before the rehearsal dinner ultimatum. Ashley had opened the document the following morning and edited the final paragraph. Adding the line about fleeing the country proved my sister had weaponized her knowledge of my upcoming Maldives vacation. Taking out my phone, I captured clear photographs of the metadata using the authorized internal audit application. An urgent notification banner suddenly dropped down from the top right corner of my monitor. An IT service ticket had just been generated. Permanent deletion requested by Carol Reed. Priority urgent, scheduled for processing tonight. Foundation servers did not automatically delete files based on a countdown clock. An administrator had to manually approve and execute a hard deletion. Stopping that process required formal intervention. I needed to call independent counsel and initiate an official legal hold before the system administrator returned from dinner. My fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, copying the urgent ticket number and the metadata screenshots into a secure message for Elaine Porter. Dialing her direct line took only a second. The attorney answered immediately, her voice calm against the panic rising in my throat. I explained the deletion request sitting in the system queue. Elaine instructed me to stay on the line while she drafted the formal, legal hold. 10 minutes later, official notices hit the inboxes of the Information Technology Department, the document custodian, and the audit committee. The administrator was legally bound to freeze the deletion request, preserving the entire version history and all associated audit logs. Carol would only see that her ticket had been shifted to a pending status restricted by counsel, completely unaware that her own daughter had initiated the block. Securing the evidence was only the first step. The students needed protection before my mother realized what was happening. Pulling the thick blue folder labeled Student Commitments from my desk drawer, I opened it flat on the table. The worn pages contained every single scholarship pledge approved by the board for the upcoming semester. I drafted an urgent request to Ruth Bennett, the chair of the audit committee, asking to move those exact amounts into a segregated disbursement account immediately. Doing this would legally lock the money away from any vendor expenses. Ruth replied within 15 minutes, attaching the written consent of the committee. My chest felt marginally lighter when the transfer confirmation appeared on my screen. Across town, Maya Hernandez and dozens of other students would receive their automated tuition confirmations right on schedule, completely shielded from the impending collapse of the foundation. Tracing the missing funds further back required reviewing the approval logs. The initials belonging to Martin Cho, our finance director, sat next to 3 massive donor hospitality transfers. Calling his extension routed directly to voicemail, and an automated out-of-office reply indicated he had taken sudden personal leave. Elaine advised caution when I reported the discovery. The seasoned lawyer warned against jumping to conclusions, but she firmly directed me to secure his workstation for the pending review. My mother did not wait long to escalate her own strategy. An alert popped up on my screen indicating a new security request. Carol had asked the network administrator to revoke my system access immediately, citing emotional instability before the family wedding. Because the legal hold was already active, the department had to notify Elaine before altering any permissions. Our counsel negotiated a temporary window, allowing me just enough time to complete my secure data export. I voluntarily surrendered my login credentials an hour later. Typing a final message to the network team, I told them to preserve the records and let my mother have the title. Walking out of that building required severing every remaining string. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I used my phone to change my emergency contacts, drop off the family mobile plan, and update my permanent mailing address. The only items in my passenger seat were the framed photograph of my father and the printed job offer for the operations role in Atlanta. I did not wait for them to fire me. Martin Cho was waiting at a small coffee shop near the courthouse later that afternoon, his hands shaking around a paper cup. Elaine and I sat across from him in a quiet corner booth. The finance director looked exhausted, avoiding my eyes as he admitted to approving a coded invoice under direct pressure from my mother. He had been terrified of losing his pension, so he complied, but he quietly retained access to the original vendor correspondence archive. He slid a tablet across the table, logging into the secure portal for us. The digital archive held the unaltered billing statements and a specific email thread. The final message from Carol contained a very clear directive. Do not send the original version to Vanessa. Scrolling past that damning instruction, another file caught my attention. It was an unopened digital document labeled with the name of the hotel venue. Opening the file revealed the final event guest list. I recognized the names of our relatives, friends, and the wedding party members. Looking closer at the room, assignments made my jaw tighten. Maya Hernandez and 30 other scholarship recipients were listed as overnight youth ambassadors. Their names had been used to falsely book the luxury suites actually occupied by Ashley and her bridesmaids. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car outside the coffee shop, I opened my secure work email. Typing carefully on the small screen, I sent a brief inquiry to Maya Hernandez and 2 other scholarship recipients. I asked if they had received invitations to serve as youth ambassadors at a historic hotel in Charleston that coming weekend. Their replies arrived within 10 minutes. None of them had been invited, and Maya added that she had never even visited Charleston. Capturing those responses, I filed them directly into the secure legal folder Elaine had established. I did not explain the situation to the students because they needed to stay completely clear of the blast radius. Driving back to my condominium, I logged into a scheduled video conference from my kitchen island. Ruth, Bennett, Elaine, and 2 independent board members appeared on my laptop screen. Presenting the compiled evidence index required keeping my voice perfectly level. I laid out the original invoices alongside the altered billing codes, then brought up the falsified guest list. The board members listened in silence, while the architecture of the theft was systematically exposed. Ruth adjusted her glasses, stating they could not determine criminal fraud on a Friday evening. However, the risk of material misrepresentation and unauthorized private benefit was undeniable. The audit chair confirmed an emergency session would take place early Sunday morning. Depending on their legal review, the foundation would likely withdraw its contracting authorization immediately. My mother called just as I finished packing my suitcase, her voice floating through the speaker, coated in that familiar, suffocating concern. She warned that triggering an audit would force the foundation to close its doors permanently, and as a result, hundreds of students would lose their tuition funding. I zipped my leather bag closed. The scholarship commitments were already segregated and safe, but I kept that information to myself. My silence must have sounded like surrender to her. You can protect strangers, or you can protect your family, my mother said softly. You cannot do both. That evening, the demand I had been expecting finally arrived. At the rehearsal dinner, Ashley stood at the head of the table and called the missing $25,000 my required family contribution. I kept my hands resting lightly on the white tablecloth. Do you want a wedding gift? Or do you want money back in the account before Monday? Both, Ashley snapped. Carol gripped her wrist, but the admission was already out. I folded my linen napkin, stood up, and looked directly at my sister. Enjoy your wedding. Walking through the quiet country club lobby, the heavy wooden doors closed behind me with a solid thud. I sat in my car and attached my signed statement to the final evidence index. Hitting send delivered the complete package to Elaine, meaning the independent board now had everything they needed to act without my physical presence. The drive to Charleston International Airport took less than 30 minutes. Pulling my suitcase from the trunk, I walked into the bright terminal and checked my bag all the way through to Malé. My itinerary included a short domestic hop to New York, followed by an overnight flight to Doha, and finally the connection to the islands. Sitting at the departure gate, I drafted a formal resignation letter, effective immediately upon the completion of the secure data handoff. Pushing that email through felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding for 12 years. Opening my phone settings, I disabled my family location sharing permissions. I removed myself from the shared cellular plan and deleted my mother as my emergency contact. A voicemail notification popped onto the screen. Carol had left a brief, breathless message. Come back before you destroy your sister. I let the audio file save to the legal folder. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft taxied down the runway. A final text message from Ashley vibrated against my palm. You are nothing without us. Instead of replying, I deleted the shortcut to the family group chat from my home screen. The evidence remained safely stored, but their direct line to my attention was permanently severed. My thumb hovered over the airplane mode toggle. Right before the cellular signal dropped, a new email arrived in my inbox. The sender was Ruth Bennett. Her message was brief and devastatingly clear. Emergency board action scheduled for 8 in the morning. If the foundation withdraws, the hotel will not release the ballroom. I looked at the glowing digital clock on my screen, then pushed the toggle. The phone went completely dark. The aircraft wheels touched down on the blazing tarmac in Doha, and the cabin immediately filled with the restless sound of shifting luggage and unbuckling seatbelts. 14 hours had passed since I completely severed my cellular connection on the runway in New York. Stepping off the plane and walking into the sprawling, glass-walled international terminal, the aggressive air conditioning chilled the sweat on the back of my neck. The heavy scent of roasted coffee beans and expensive duty-free perfume washed over me, a sharp contrast to the stale, recycled air of the passenger cabin. Finding a quiet, isolated corner in the transit lounge, I sat down in a leather armchair and pulled my phone from my travel bag. I turned off airplane mode and waited for the network to find a signal. The device vibrated violently against my palm. The mechanical spasm was continuous, lasting for nearly a full minute as data rushed into the processor. Notifications flooded the glass screen faster than my eyes could process the names and timestamps. When the digital avalanche finally came to a halt, the red notification badge hovering over my phone application displayed a staggering number. 72 missed calls. Text messages from aunts, cousins, and family friends were stacked by the dozens. The early messages from Saturday night were full of self-righteous anger, demanding I apologize to the bride. The messages sent early Sunday morning had shifted into sheer panic. The hotel would not let anyone inside the ballroom, and the caterers were locked in the loading dock. Before listening to a single audio message, I opened my secure legal inbox. An encrypted message from Elaine Porter sat at the very top of the queue, carrying a timestamp from 8 o'clock Sunday morning, Eastern Standard Time. The Independent Audit Committee had convened an emergency video conference while I was sleeping somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. Reading through the formal minutes attached to the email, the sequence of events laid out a swift and surgical dismantling of my mother's assumed authority. The Foundation Council had formally presented the evidence of material misrepresentation. The gathering in Charleston had been documented in our financial system as a donor appreciation weekend, but the reality was a deeply personal, unauthorized family wedding. Following the strict organizational bylaws, the audit chair and 2 acting officers voted to immediately suspend Carol's contracting authority pending full board ratification. Official legal notices had been dispatched simultaneously to the historic hotel, the liability insurer, and the corporate credit card issuer. The Reed Scholars Foundation had officially withdrawn as the authorized contracting party for the event. Armed with that legal context, I switched over to my voicemail application and played the first recorded message. The audio timestamp marked 8:15 in the morning. The recording started with the sharp, echoing sound of someone pounding on thick glass. Through the tiny speaker of my phone, the chaotic acoustics of the hotel lobby painted a vivid picture of the fallout. My mother was speaking directly into the receiver, her voice pitched high and breathless with panic. She demanded I answer the phone immediately and fix a massive misunderstanding with the venue management. In the background, Ashley was crying loudly. My younger sister yelled at someone off camera that her makeup artists and floral vendors were trapped in the parking lot. Then, a calm, professional male voice cut through the background noise. It was the venue manager, and his words were perfectly clear even over the cellular connection. He explained that the contracting organization had formally withdrawn their authorization an hour prior. He politely listed 3 non-negotiable requirements to open the ballroom doors. The hotel required a new personal contract, a new liability insurance certificate, and a valid payment method capable of covering the massive event deposit. Without those 3 items presented immediately, the facility was completely off-limits. No police officers stormed the lobby, and nobody was placed in handcuffs. The consequence was simply a locked door and a devastating silence as the arriving guests began to turn around and walk away from the reception desk. I saved the first recording to my secure case file and moved to the next. The second message came from Carol exactly 1 hour later. The initial panic in her voice had hardened into a desperate, defensive fury. The woman who had spent decades meticulously cultivating her public image was watching it disintegrate in real time. She claimed she had called Ruth Bennett directly, threatening that all the major community donors would abandon the scholarship program if the board ruined this family celebration. Ruth had apparently stood her ground, informing my mother that the suspension was based entirely on documentary evidence and financial logs, not a petty family dispute. Refusing to accept defeat, Carol pivoted her narrative on the recording. She commanded me to call the audit committee and confess that I was suffering from an emotional breakdown. My mother wanted me to claim I was simply seeking revenge because I was bitter and single, and the foundation had entirely misunderstood my erratic accounting behavior. Elaine had attached a brief note to her email confirming this exact exchange. The Foundation Council had officially informed Carol that all future communications with the organization and its employees had to be conducted exclusively in writing. The third significant message in the queue came from a different number. Ashley had left a voice note, her words thick and wet. The beautiful bride was no longer making demands about $25,000 family contributions. "Tell them the audit is canceled," my sister pleaded into the microphone, her voice dropping into a frantic whisper. "Say you approved the floral budget. Say you made a mistake with the venue contract. You owe me this." Hearing the raw entitlement in her voice did not make me smile, nor did it bring any overwhelming sense of vindication. My chest just felt incredibly heavy. I saved the audio file directly into the secure legal folder, preserving her blatant attempt to solicit a false statement for the upcoming investigation. I did not type out a reply to her. Instead, I drafted a single text message to Jonathan, her fiancé. I advised him to speak to independent legal counsel because I could not discuss an active foundation review. I refused to hand him the evidence just to exact personal revenge against my sister. My phone vibrated again, delivering a fresh update from Elaine. Her message outlined a massive complication that had erupted just before noon back in Charleston. Jonathan had not been waiting passively in the hotel lobby while the wedding fell apart. Seeing the locked doors and the panicking vendors, the groom had demanded a clear explanation from the wedding planner. The planner, trying to prove the venue was being entirely unreasonable, showed Jonathan the master contract summary. Right at the top of the page, the groom saw the name of the Reed Scholars Foundation. Ashley had tried to handle the situation by claiming I had promised to sponsor the wedding as a generous gift and that I was withdrawing the money at the last minute out of pure jealousy. But the wedding planner made a fatal administrative error. Attempting to clarify the complex billing structure, the planner showed Jonathan an email where Ashley specifically described the gathering as a donor weekend to secure a strict nonprofit discount rate. Jonathan had asked his bride if I had actually approved any of those documents. Ashley had refused to answer him directly. According to the summary from Elaine, the situation escalated rapidly in the hotel lobby. Jonathan demanded the wedding planner turn over the entire comprehensive budget packet. The architect wanted to see exactly where every single dollar was supposed to come from. Flipping through the printed pages, Jonathan found the travel itinerary for their upcoming romantic getaway. The luxurious resort in the Maldives was clearly listed on the vendor manifest. However, the billing description attached to the reservation did not say honeymoon. The invoice categorized the expensive tropical vacation as a leadership retreat for youth ambassadors. My sister had chosen the exact same destination she had previously mocked me for visiting alone, and she had used the identities of local scholarship students to pay for it. She was not just borrowing foundation funds for a single afternoon of celebration in South Carolina. Ashley had planned to extend the fraudulent private benefit across the globe. A new incoming call lit up my screen, interrupting my reading and pulling my attention away from the email. The caller identification displayed Jonathan's full name. I placed the phone face down on the small table next to my armchair. I let the device vibrate against the wood until the automated system routed him to voicemail. A minute later, a new audio file appeared in my inbox. I pressed play, holding the speaker close to my ear to hear him over the dull roar of the airport terminal. Jonathan sounded completely hollowed out. His message contained only a single sentence. What else did she put my name on? Carol began her counterattack on Monday morning, not with a legal filing, but with a calculated social media campaign designed to isolate me. She sent a lengthy, carefully crafted email to our entire extended family, claiming my recent burnout had spiraled into an uncontrollable emotional breakdown. According to the message, my jealousy over Ashley's wedding had triggered a spiteful act of sabotage against the foundation. My phone became a constant source of incoming fire as cousins and aunts reached out, some filled with genuine pity and others with sharp, judgmental questions about why I would destroy our family reputation over such a petty grievance. I refused to engage with any of them. Each time a notification appeared on my screen, I simply took a screenshot and transferred the information to Elaine. Ignoring their accusations was not an admission of guilt, but a tactical decision to keep my own history clean. My sister followed up by posting a cryptic, tearful video to her social media accounts about enduring a profound betrayal on her wedding day. The comments section filled with thousands of strangers calling for justice against the sister who would stoop so low. None of that noise could reach me in the Maldives. I had checked into a quiet, secluded guest house on a small island, far removed from the lavish overwater villas listed on the fraudulent honeymoon invoice. My days consisted of sleeping, eating fresh fruit, and walking along the shoreline. Every afternoon at 4, I held a scheduled video call with Elaine to review the progress of the independent investigation. This was my sanctuary, a physical and emotional boundary between the life I had discarded and the career I was preparing to start in Atlanta. The foundation had hired an outside forensic accounting firm to perform a deep audit, and I stayed entirely clear of their process to ensure the results remained objective. My only responsibility was answering their occasional questions and providing the index for the records I had already secured. I sat on my porch during one of these calls, watching the waves roll in while Elaine briefed me on the latest developments. Martin Cho had finally broken down. He had come forward to admit he backdated an approval note under direct pressure from my mother, and he had signed a formal statement confirming he was not the architect of the theft. Carol had spent the entire morning screaming at the audit committee, insisting that Martin was the sole culprit who had deceived her. The forensic accountants remained unimpressed. They had mapped the vendor beneficiary payments directly back to Carol's administrative portal and Ashley's personal wedding vendors. Martin had made a mistake, but he was certainly not the mastermind. My phone rang halfway through the call. Jonathan was on the line, his voice sounding brittle and exhausted. He told me he had just received a formal preservation notice from the foundation because his name appeared on the honeymoon paperwork. He was trying to figure out why he was being dragged into a financial investigation for a trip he never took. I told him the truth, but I kept it brief. I explained that Ashley had known about the foundation funds covering their expenses and had assumed I would eventually authorize the accounting logs to keep everything hidden. When he asked why she had helped draft the incident report accusing me of theft, I just told him to look closer at the document revision history. "She knew I was going to the Maldives 6 months ago, Jonathan," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "She didn't just open that file. She added the line about me fleeing the country to create a narrative that fit my travel schedule." The silence on the line stretched for nearly a minute. I could almost hear the pieces clicking into place in his mind. He told me he was moving out of their shared apartment and ending the relationship. He was not calling to save me or to apologize for his own role in the mess. He was calling because he was terrified of the civil liability he was now facing. The next day, an unexpected message arrived from Maya Hernandez. She sent a brief note thanking me for the scholarship disbursement that had arrived right on time, mentioning that she had heard rumors the foundation was going through a difficult transition. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was the only positive reinforcement I needed. The students were safe because I had moved the money, not because I had stayed silent or kept playing the role of the devoted family daughter. Elaine called back on Wednesday with the preliminary audit results. The final total of unauthorized personal benefits was significantly higher than we initially suspected. It was not $25,000. It was more than $200,000 stolen over the last 3 years. The wedding, the hotel stays, the high-end branding photo shoots, and the family vacations were all funded by the money meant for student books and tuition. $200,000 was a sum the community donors would never overlook. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the endless turquoise water. Carol and Ashley had treated the scholarship fund like a personal bank account for so long that they truly believed they were entitled to it. They never thought I would do anything other than sweep their expenses under the rug. Elaine paused before reading the final piece of information. She told me the auditors had flagged a specific document revision that had been hidden deep in the system. Ashley had not just opened the incident summary. She had spent an entire afternoon refining the text of the accusation. "Vanessa plans to flee the country immediately after taking the funds," Elaine read from the report. "The timestamp shows she added that sentence a few minutes after you sent the Maldives booking confirmation to the family group chat." I put the phone down, feeling a strange, cold clarity settle over me. My sister had not just stolen money. She had calculated the exact moment to frame me as a criminal, using my own vacation plans as the perfect evidence of my guilt. I did not need to shout or scream at the screen. The reality was finally documented in a way that the board could never ignore. I looked at the dark water and realized that the perfect image they had built for themselves was already cracking. The audit was not just a procedure anymore, it was an inevitable collapse. I picked up my phone and sent a short reply to Elaine. I told her I would be ready for the board hearing. It was time to go home and finish this. 6 weeks after leaving Charleston, I stepped into the foundation boardroom. The air felt heavy, stagnant with the scent of floor wax and old paper. Carol sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, attempting to maintain the illusion of authority despite the formal suspension of her duties. Ashley sat beside her, eyes red and puffy, flanked by a silent attorney who kept glancing at his watch. I took a seat across from them, setting the heavy gold pen my father had owned on the table, a stark reminder of the legacy they had tried to steal. Elaine stood to begin the proceedings, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion as she directed Carol to confirm her previous statements for the official record. My mother painted a vivid picture of a jealous older sister sabotaging a wedding because she could not handle seeing her younger sibling happy. She insisted that every unauthorized expense had been a legitimate donor engagement, claiming I knew about the entire plan from the beginning. I remained silent, watching the attorney meticulously present a chain of financial evidence. The forensic accountant placed the original catering invoices beside the ones my mother had forced the vendor to revise. When the emails where Carol demanded foundation-compatible language appeared on the projector, she sputtered, blaming the administrative staff for making unauthorized changes she knew nothing about. The defense crumbled further when the real guest list, filled with relatives, was displayed next to the fictitious youth ambassador list Ashley had provided. Elaine then opened the 3 email warnings I had sent years earlier, documenting my formal protests regarding the misappropriated expense codes. Carol tried to dismiss them as internal disagreements, but the audit log display stopped her cold. It clearly showed the system required a second signature for every final transaction, and the records proved that I had never signed them. Carol had used her master account to override my blocks. Then came the incident summary file. The metadata displayed on the screen showed Carol as the creator, with Ashley identified as the final editor. I watched the color drain from my sister's face as the projection highlighted the line regarding me fleeing the country, a sentence Ashley had added minutes after I shared my Maldives booking confirmation with the family 6 months earlier. Ashley started to sob, whispering that she had only done exactly what Mom told her to do. "Nobody checks those codes," I quoted quietly, referencing the text message Ashley had sent me in a moment of misplaced confidence. Carol rose from her chair, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. She threatened that if the board removed her, the entire scholarship program would collapse and leave every student without a single dollar of support. I reached into my bag and pulled out the blue folder labeled Student Commitments. I presented the document showing that every single scholarship award had been legally separated into a secure, segregated account with the formal consent of the committee, weeks before the wedding ever occurred. The room went completely still. I looked at the board members and said, "I did not destroy the foundation. I removed the family from the money it never owned." The vote was unanimous. Carol was stripped of her chair position and all representational rights. Ashley's role was terminated, and the board demanded the full repayment of all personal expenditures. The members voted to refer the entire file to external regulators and civil counsel for immediate review. As the meeting adjourned, Carol surged toward me in the hallway, her voice a poisonous whisper. She insisted that the house, the donors, and the family name would always be under her control. Before I could reply, Elaine stepped out of the boardroom holding a thick envelope. She looked Carol in the eye and said, "Not after the restitution demand you are about to receive." Jonathan met Ashley in the lobby of their apartment building 3 days after the board hearing to return his key and retrieve his remaining personal belongings. The air in the foyer felt sterile, smelling of industrial cleaner and damp concrete. I was not there to witness it, but the details came to me through the quiet, efficient updates from Elaine. The man who had nearly become my brother-in-law did not scream or throw things. He simply looked at the woman he was supposed to marry and told her that the issue was never about a canceled wedding. The betrayal ran far deeper than a single weekend. He explained that building a marriage on the future of scholarship students and drafting a formal accusation against an innocent sister was a fundamental flaw he could never reconcile. Ashley tried to deflect the blame, suggesting they could simply tell the public that Carol had manipulated her. Jonathan just gestured toward the document revision history on his phone, pointed out her own initials, and walked out the door without looking back. The reputation my sister had carefully constructed as a philanthropic bride disintegrated over the next few weeks. National sponsors that had previously clamored to be featured in her social media posts issued brief, cold statements announcing the immediate termination of their contracts. Every older post she made was suddenly scrutinized, cross-referenced against the official audit findings, and mocked by thousands of online observers who had previously adored her. The lavish lifestyle she lived while masquerading as a humble charity ambassador turned into her greatest social liability. She had to sell her luxury vehicle, her designer gown collection, and every piece of jewelry she had received as wedding gifts to contribute to the initial settlement fund. I did not watch her videos or read the comments. I only knew that the image she had built by exploiting the labor and integrity of others had finally lost its value. My mother fared no better as the legal consequences began to mount. The restitution demand identified more than $200,000 in stolen funds, plus the substantial costs incurred by the independent forensic audit. Carol was forced to sell the family vacation property by the sea to satisfy the first stage of the repayment schedule. The local gala committees and country club boards she had once dominated quietly rescinded her invitations while the investigations remained active. The large, gilded portrait of the foundation chair that had hung in the lobby for years was taken down by the maintenance staff on a quiet Tuesday morning, leaving a pale, rectangular ghost on the wallpaper. Carol called me exactly once during that month. She sounded frantic, demanding that I sign a legal statement confirming she had simply misunderstood the invoice coding. She relied on the same tired, manipulative script, asking how I could be so cruel after everything she had given me. "You gave me responsibility," I told her, my voice steady, while I sat at my new desk in Atlanta. "Then you used it as a hiding place. When she threatened to disown me and cut me off from the family entirely, I reminded her that the bridge had already burned when she drafted that fraudulent incident report. I ended the call and blocked the number, finally finishing the conversation she never wanted to have. My new life in Atlanta began in a quiet, professional office within an independent nonprofit dedicated to education reform. I was not the founder, nor was I the public face of the organization. I was simply the chief operating officer, a professional doing a job that was clearly defined in my contract. My previous employer had honored the offer letter I signed months before the foundation scandal broke. I sold the small condominium in Charlotte to simplify my finances and moved into a bright, modern apartment that carried no history of family drama. For the first time in over a decade, I could open an email without bracing for a disaster, and I could sign a budget report without fear of the numbers being twisted into a weapon. The foundation audit officially cleared me of all allegations, and the board released a public statement confirming that the restricted funds had been misused by parties who were no longer involved with the program. Every single student award had been successfully protected, and the files were transferred to the appropriate regulatory authorities. A civil restitution agreement established strict, long-term limits on any future involvement Carol or Ashley could have with the organization. What my mother always referred to as our family legacy had never actually belonged to her. The board took the opportunity to completely restructure the foundation, permanently ending the period of family control and renaming the core program as the Thomas Reed Scholars Program under a completely independent charter. I was no longer the foundation owner's daughter. I was a professional, an architect of systems who had survived the fire. Ruth Bennett reached out to me toward the end of September. She invited me to return to Charlotte to sign the new charter documents during the inaugural scholarship ceremony of the reformed program. She told me that one specific signature was missing, and it belonged on the new founding records. I walked into my office that morning and saw a familiar velvet box sitting on my desk. The gold fountain pen my father had owned, the one Carol had been obsessed with wielding, had been recovered from the old office safe. It was waiting for me. I held the pen, felt the weight of it, and realized I finally understood why it had been so important to keep it safe for all these years. The scholarship award ceremony took place in a brightly lit community college auditorium, devoid of the aggressive floral installations and expensive gala trappings that had defined my sister's failed wedding. A new board of directors, comprised entirely of independent professionals and former scholarship recipients, took their seats on the stage. I sat in the front row as a guest and a technical advisor, watching the transition of power from the back of the room rather than holding the reins of the entire organization. Maya Hernandez stood on the stage, smiling as she collected her scholarship envelope. The reports from the audit committee were conclusive. Every single financial commitment had been successfully honored. I kept my blue folder on my lap, but for the first time in over a decade, I felt no urge to clutch it for security. The program was thriving, fully insulated from the personal greed that had nearly destroyed its foundation. People who believed the organization belonged to them had been successfully removed from the equation. Ashley appeared just outside the glass entrance of the hall, halfway through the ceremony. She looked smaller than I remembered, her expensive clothes replaced by a nondescript blazer and plain denim. Seeing me through the pane, she gestured for me to step outside. I walked to the entrance and pushed the door open just enough to hear her. She wanted me to sign a statement for the court, suggesting she had been confused by the accounting practices and did not understand the fraudulent invoices. I looked at my sister, whose ambition had been to become an influencer of charity, and asked if she was prepared to admit to the board that she had personally edited the incident report intended to frame me. "Mom told me to," Ashley whispered, her eyes fixed on the pavement. "And you chose to," I replied. I did not let her inside the hall, nor did I raise my voice. I simply retreated back into the room and let the door close between us. Carol sat in a parked car at the edge of the parking lot, watching the students walk out with their awards. She looked older through the windshield, a woman stripped of the power she once wielded like a weapon. She tried calling my phone, but I left the device in my bag, letting the screen stay dark. The absence of authority was the only punishment she truly understood. Ruth walked up to me after the program concluded, carrying the heavy gold fountain pen that had been recovered from the old office. The new charter prohibited any family member from receiving private benefits, mandated dual approval for all major expenditures, and forbade the use of scholarship beneficiary data for personal promotional activities. I took the pen and signed my name as the founding operations architect, then handed the instrument to the foundation archivist. It belonged in the historical record of the program, not in a private collection. Maya approached me as the crowd thinned, mentioning she had heard the program almost disappeared last spring. No, I told her, finally letting the weight of the last year slip away. It was simply separated from the people who thought they owned it. I stood near the entrance as the sun began to dip behind the university buildings. Ashley remained outside the glass, and Carol stayed in the car, neither woman capable of entering the space where they no longer held influence. I felt no hatred toward them as I watched their silhouettes fade in the evening light. I walked back toward the auditorium, letting the door click shut behind me. For the first time in my life, I understood that love was not supposed to require my disappearance. You have reached the end of this story, but the lessons embedded in these events remain essential for anyone currently navigating the delicate balance between loyalty and self-preservation. When you find yourself acting as the invisible anchor for your family, remember that love is not synonymous with endurance. You must realize that setting boundaries is not an act of hostility. It is the only way to protect your own integrity and the legacy you have worked so hard to build. You cannot effectively support the people who rely on you if you are constantly compromising your values to shield them from the natural consequences of their own choices. True stewardship requires the courage to say no, especially when that refusal is the only thing preventing those you care about from causing further harm to themselves and others. You have the right to claim the space you have earned through your own labor and intellect, regardless of what the people around you expect from your role in the family hierarchy. If you are currently being asked to sacrifice your financial stability or professional reputation to maintain a facade of perfection for someone else, please recognize those signs as immediate warnings. You are not responsible for the wreckage caused by other people's entitlement, and you are certainly not obligated to fund an image that is fundamentally built on exploitation. Protecting your future is not the same as betraying your past. By choosing to step away from the cycles of manipulation, you are not destroying the foundation of your relationships. You are simply refusing to let those relationships consume the person you have become. It takes an immense amount of strength to close a door that you have spent years holding open for others, but there is a profound peace waiting for you on the other side of that threshold. You deserve to live a life where your efforts are recognized, your boundaries are respected, and your love does not come at the cost of your own existence. Have you ever felt like you were being asked to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm? And what was the moment you realized you finally had the power to walk away from that impossible demand?